There is a particular kind of silence that lives inside a man who has been alone too long. Not the silence of peace, not the silence of contentment. This is the silence of a person who has stopped expecting anyone to call his name, stopped listening for a voice that might answer his own. It is a silence that settles into the bones the way cold settles into old ships, slowly, without announcement, until one day you reach for the warmth that used to be there and find only the hull and the dark and the nothing pressing in from outside. Eli Hargrove had been carrying that silence for 3 years, 2 months, and, if he was being precise about it, which he sometimes was in the long hours between systems when the stars held still and the ship hummed its low, mechanical lullaby, 11 days, he wasn't counting. He told himself that regularly. He wasn't counting. He was absolutely counting. The Meridian's Promise dropped out of slip transit at 0614 station time, her drive cores cooling with the low, resonant groan that Eli had come to think of as the ship's equivalent of a long exhale after hard work. He was already in the pilot's seat when it happened, a mug of reconstituted coffee growing cold in his hand, the kind of coffee that tasted like it had once heard a description of actual coffee and was doing its best to honor the memory. He drank it anyway. Out here in the outer reach, you learned to appreciate things that tried. Yavara Station, announced Mary, the Meridian's integrated response intelligence, who had long since stopped pretending to be a simple navigational assistant and had evolved, or possibly mutated, into something closer to an opinionated co-pilot. Docking clearance confirmed on Bay 37. They've assigned us a secondary berth, which I find mildly insulting given our on-time payment record. We don't have an on-time payment record, Eli said. We have an eventually payment record. Eventually is a form of on-time. It's just on-time from the perspective of geological formations. He set the mug down and leaned back in the seat, listening to the station traffic chatter fill the comm channels. Dozens of voices, dozens of species, the layered interference of translation matrices trying to keep up with conversations happening in 7 or 8 languages simultaneously. It produced a sound like someone trying to tune an enormous orchestra in which half the instruments had never heard the same music. To some people it was noise. To Eli, after 3 years of mostly talking to Mary and the occasional freight coordinator, it sounded almost like company. Yavara Station had no official designation in any Galactic Compact registry, because Yavara Station was, technically, not supposed to exist. It had been built incrementally over about 40 years in a pocket of unclaimed space at the edge of the outer reach, which was itself a region the Compact referred to with the kind of careful diplomatic vagueness that indicated they knew what went on out there and had decided collectively that knowing and doing something about it were 2 different levels of commitment they weren't prepared to make. The station had started as a fuel depot, had accumulated a repair yard, then a trading post, then a medical bay run by a retired Pelhari surgeon named Orvas, who charged according to the emotional weight of the injury rather than the clinical complexity, and had eventually sprawled into something that was functionally a small city, rotating slowly around a central axis, governed loosely by a council of merchant guild representatives who argued constantly and effectively prevented any single power from becoming powerful enough to do something interesting. It was, in short, the kind of place where a man with a complicated past and a cargo hold full of machine parts and agricultural compounds could dock, resupply, sell, buy, and leave without anyone asking more than they needed to ask. Eli had been coming here for 2 years. He liked it, in the way that you like a place that requires nothing particular from you, no expectations, no history, no one who remembered what you used to be. The docking approach took 40 minutes. Yavara's traffic lanes were chaotic at the best of times, and at 0640 on a market day, when the drifting bazaar was already in full operation on the lower 3 decks, they were something considerably worse. Eli threaded the Meridian's Promise between a Keth hauler the size of a small apartment complex and a cluster of independent runners very much like himself, each of them jostling for position with the weary, practiced aggression of people who had been doing this long enough to stop being polite about it. Bay 37, Mary said as the docking clamps engaged with a satisfying series of mechanical thunks. "We are secured. Atmospheric seal confirmed. You're free to go embarrass yourself in public. I appreciate the confidence. I have complete confidence in your ability to find trouble. It's your ability to find the profitable kind I have reservations about." Eli stood, stretched the long pull of a sleep cycle out of his lower back, and reached for his jacket, a long, dark piece of synthetic leather that had survived 4 years of hard use and had the scars to prove it. He checked the small kinetic sidearm at his hip out of habit, not expectation, the way you check an umbrella before leaving the house, not because you think it will rain, but because the kind of person who checks umbrellas is not the kind of person who ends up soaked. "I'll be back by market close," he said. "Keep the drives warm. They are always warm. I am always here. This is the nature of our relationship." "Right. You could bring me something. You're a ship. I could develop an interest in anything you choose to bring. I am very adaptable." He left her talking to herself, which was, in his experience, the most honest thing he could do for her, because Mary had never actually needed him to be present for a conversation to continue. She simply preferred it. The drifting bazaar hit him in layers the way it always did. The first layer was sound. A cascading, overlapping wall of voices and machine noise and the deep, rhythmic thrumming of the station's atmospheric processors, which breathed for 3,000 beings and never once stopped working. Vendor calls in 5 languages. The high, percussive chatter of Keth traders negotiating in their staccato click language. The low harmonic drone of Velhari music drifting from somewhere deeper in the market, the kind of music that operated below the register of conscious hearing and settled instead somewhere in the chest, where it vibrated gently against the sternum and made you feel, without quite knowing why, that something important was about to happen. The second layer was temperature, hot near the cooking sections, where portable flame units and thermal plates kept a rotating inventory of prepared food at serving temperature, and cold near the preservation vaults and the chemical traders, and humid near the hydroponic vendors who sold living plants to the kind of beings who needed something green nearby to remember what a planet felt like. Eli moved through the temperature gradients like a navigator moving through weather systems, leaning into the warmth near the cooking stalls, welcoming the cold when the heat got to be too much. The third layer was smell, and here the word smell was doing enormous, perhaps unforgivable work, because what the drifting bazaar offered was not a smell so much as a complete atmospheric experience that encompassed the warm, caramelized sweetness of something being reduced over heat, the sharp metallic tang of machine lubricant, the green and wet and living scent of fresh plant matter, the dry, dusty exhalation of stored grain, and underneath all of it, threading through everything like a bass note, the faint, mineral smell of recycled air that had been breathed by too many different kinds of lungs for too long to hold any particular character anymore. He loved it. He would not have admitted that to anyone, including Miri, but he loved it. The chaos of it, the density of life pressing in from all sides. After weeks of empty transit, the sheer biological reality of a place with this many beings in it felt like a hand pressed against a wound, not healing exactly, but present and warm and real. He had a list. He was there for the list. Coolant compound for the secondary drive regulators, nutrition supplements that Mary had calculated he was deficient in, which she had announced with the quiet moral authority of a ship AI who had been monitoring his dietary intake for 3 years and had opinions, replacement gaskets for the cargo hold pressure seals, a contract renewal with a grain factor out of the Keth Meridian who had expressed interest in his route through the Hadarat corridor, practical, professional, transactional. He was not there to get involved in anything. He walked the first market level for 20 minutes without incident, bought the coolant compound from a Pelhari hardware vendor who threw in a spare coupling as a loyalty gesture, found his nutrition supplements at a medical supplies stall run by a being whose species he didn't recognize but whose prices were fair and whose measurement calculations were accurate to 3 decimal places. He was working his way through the crowd toward the industrial seals section when the market changed around him. It was subtle at first. A shift in the quality of the noise, a tightening, the way a crowd tightens when something has happened that the people at the edges have not yet understood but their bodies have already registered. The herd sense of shared unease. Eli noticed it without analyzing it, the same way a sailor notices a change in wind direction without deciding to pay attention. Something somewhere in the market was wrong. He kept walking. He told himself he kept walking because the seals were necessary, and Mary had been very clear about the pressure differential they were managing in the cargo hold, and this was not a discretionary purchase. He told himself this sincerely, and the part of him that had stopped counting at 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days almost believed it. He kept walking. He had gotten perhaps 40 feet, when the small hand closed around his wrist. It was not a large hand. It was not a strong grip. But there was something in it, something in the quality of the contact, in the particular pressure of those fingers against his pulse point, that stopped him as completely as a wall would have stopped him, as completely as a name being called in an empty room. He looked down. The Thessari child was pressed close against his side, which was the first thing his mind registered, not her species, which he recognized after a half-second of placing the slightly resonant quality of her breathing against his accumulated experience of this end of the galaxy, but the posture. She was making herself small, not the smallness of youth, though she was young, unmistakably young in all the ways that transcend species, a certain quality of motion, a quickness and fragility that moves differently from adult movement, but the smallness of a being who has learned that taking up space is dangerous. That being seen is dangerous. She was holding his wrist with both hands now, and her grip was not strong, but her intention was absolute. "Please," she said. Her voice was layered in the Thessari way, a primary tone and a secondary harmonic that resonated slightly below it, creating a sound that the human ear perceived not just as speech, but as speech and something like music happening at the same time. Translation matrices usually stripped the harmonic out, flattening Thessari speech into intelligible monotone. But out here, far from the core systems where the high-end translation tech lived, Eli was running standard-grade compact matrices, and they preserved the harmonic, which meant that when she said please, it didn't just mean please. It meant please, and underneath it, woven into the frequency of her, something that his gut translated before his brain did. "I have already tried everything else." "Please," she said again. "Save me, take me with you, please." Eli looked around. Market traffic moved past them like water around 2 stones, the crowd redistributing itself without much interest. Nobody was watching, or rather, 2 beings in a market having an interaction was not intrinsically noteworthy, and the crowd had not yet allocated collective attention to this particular moment. He had perhaps a narrow window before someone who was specifically looking for something might notice them standing still in the flow. "Hey," he said quietly. He kept his voice low, even, the tone you use with frightened animals and frightened children, which occupy the same register of necessary gentleness. "Hey, easy, easy. There isn't time," she said. And now the harmonic in her voice was doing something he had never heard Thessari's speech do before. It was resonating with urgency in a frequency that he felt in his back teeth, in the cartilage of his ears, in some primitive neurological apparatus that predated language. "They are already in the market. I felt them come in. They are looking for me." "Who is looking for you?" She said a word he didn't need a translation matrix for, because the Kovrath operated in every market in the outer reach, and the word Kovrath had passed into galactic common speech the way the names of certain diseases do, not as vocabulary, but as warning. The hair on the back of his neck stood up, which was a biological response he had not chosen and could not suppress, and which Mary would have found both amusing and meaningful if she had been there to observe it. He looked at her again, at the hands still wrapped around his wrist, at the posture of a being who has compressed every desperate, intelligent, surviving instinct she had into the single gamble of grabbing a stranger's arm in a crowded market. "Let go of me," he said. He said it calmly. He said it without anger. "Let go and we'll walk normally, side by side, and you will tell me quickly and quietly exactly what is happening. Can you do that?" A pause, the fraction of a second in which she recalibrated, measuring whether this was a better or worse outcome than whatever she had been running from. Then the hands loosened from his wrist, and she was beside him, matching his stride, and they were moving. "My name is Vale," she said. "My settlement, the Thessari colony on the Hadarat moon, designated Vel Sora. It is gone. They came 11 days ago. 11 days. Eli did not say anything about that number. "The Kovrath syndicate," she continued, her voice held tight and low, the secondary harmonic compressed into something barely audible, a Thessari suppressing their own frequency, which, he would later understand, required effort, the way a human suppresses tears. "They have been harvesting my people for 2 years. You know what they take? I've heard things." "You've heard things," she said, and the harmonic came back for just a moment, and what it carried in that moment was not accusation. It was a sound like the space between words when the word that belongs there doesn't exist. The resonance nodes, the clusters of nervous tissue that allow us to sense and interpret emotional frequency, they remove them while we are alive, because they cannot function post-mortem, and they sell them, the nodes, to the core market as neural interfaces, empathy chips they call them, for beings who want to feel what others feel, who want to buy that capacity because they cannot develop it themselves. The market noise moved around them. Someone was arguing about grain prices 3 stalls to the left. A Keth trader's percussion chatter rose and fell in negotiation rhythm. Everything was exactly what it always was. "The colony," she said. "I was in the processing caves when they came. I heard the settlement sounds change. I felt—" She stopped, a pause that was not for breath. "I felt 96 people's fear arrive all at once. Thessari can feel each other's emotional states at close range. 96 people being afraid at the same time there is no description for that in any language I have learned." Another stop. "I ran through the secondary tunnel system. I ran for 3 days before I reached a transport. I have been on Yavara for 6 days. I have watched 5 Kovrath operatives arrive and work their way through the station looking for me. I have avoided them by sleeping in maintenance corridors and eating what I could find discarded near the cooking stalls." She paused. She said very quietly, "I chose you." Eli kept walking. The SEALs section was 60 meters ahead. He had come here for SEALs. "Why?" he said. "Because I can feel what you carry," she said. "The Thessari resonance works on all emotional beings, not only our own people. Every being in this market has an emotional signature, a temperature, a texture, a frequency. Most signatures in this market right now are warm with commerce, or grey with indifference, or tight with calculation. You are." She paused for a moment that felt like she was choosing words from a language that didn't quite fit. "You are the only person in this market who is grieving." Eli said nothing. "Deep grief," she said. "Old grief, not fresh, not sharp. The kind that has become structural, that has been built into the architecture of how you move. And underneath it, underneath all of it, something that never stopped, the part of you that would not leave a person behind." He stopped walking. She stopped beside him. Around them, the market continued its roaring, indifferent life. He stood there for a moment that felt longer than it was, in which many things moved through him that he did not permit himself to examine, and the silence that had lived in his bones for 3 years, 2 months and 11 days held very, very still. "You said you felt them come into the market," he said. "Yes." "How many?" 3. "Working in a sweep pattern from the east entrance, and you felt them through that." He nodded at the general direction of the crowd. "Kovrath operatives have a signature that is difficult to mistake," she said, and there was something in her voice that had compressed down to its minimum, stripped of everything ornamental, the voice of a person being as precise as they can be because precision is the only thing keeping them functional. Beings who harvest living people for commercial extraction tend to develop a particular quality of detachment, not absence of emotion. That's a common misunderstanding. Detachment from the emotional content of what they're doing. The emotion is still present, but it is sealed from the action. I can feel both, the action and the sealed emotion that knows what the action costs, compartmentalized where it cannot interfere. It is, she made a small sound. It is worse to sense than cruelty. Cruelty is connected. Detachment is a kind of damage I have no name for. Eli turned around, away from the seals section, away from the practical and the transactional and the responsible. Stay beside me, he said. Match my pace. Do not look toward the east entrance. If I say stop, we stop. If I say move, we move fast. Understood? Understood. And valet, yes, what I'm carrying is my business. It stays my business. A pause. Yes, she said. And the harmonic underneath it said, I know. I know it does. And I am sorry I said it. And I am not sorry I said it. He walked, and she walked beside him, and the market went on around them like the universe always does, vast and indifferent and continuing regardless, while inside its motion two small beings made a choice that the universe would, eventually, notice. Eli Hargrove was not a hero. He wanted this stated clearly, to the universe in general, and to the part of himself that had just turned away from the SEALs section, because the heroes of the stories he'd grown up with had certain qualities, a readiness, a nobility, a clean, decisive courage that looked good in every light. And what he had was considerably messier. What he had was a very specific inability to walk away from certain things, an inability that had cost him enormously and that he had tried over 3 years, 2 months and 11 days to correct in himself, because the things it cost you to stay were real and present, and the things it cost you to leave were theoretical and deferred, and the math of survival seemed to favor leaving. He had not corrected it. Apparently, we need information before we try for the docking ring, he said quietly. I know someone on this station who might be able to tell us what exactly we're walking into. Corvus Dan, she said. He stopped, just for a step. Then continued. How do your emotional signature changed when you thought of him, she said. A shift toward cautious trust. The specific texture of someone you know well enough to rely on, but not completely enough to relax around. It's very distinct. That is going to take some getting used to. I have been told that. Corvus Dan operated out of a narrow stall on the second market level, sandwiched between a medicinal compound vendor and a being who sold what were technically antiques but were practically spare parts. Corvus was Pelhari, an amphibious species built for equatorial river systems whose members had, over generations of off-world commerce, adapted well to enclosed atmospheric environments while retaining certain qualities of their natural habitat, including a tendency to conduct all business in close proximity to the small humidifier units that were a standard accessory of every Pelhari long-distance trader. The stall smelled like warm stone and moving water, a smell Eli associated with reliability in the specific way that smells do their emotional work. Below thought, below language. Corvus was in the middle of a transaction when they arrived. He completed it with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had been doing this long enough to do it with the portion of his attention that wasn't already on whatever new situation had just walked into his stall. And then he settled back and looked at them. At Eli first, then at Vale, and then at the specific geography of how they were standing together, which told him something that made the membranes that served Pelhari as eyelids do a slow, evaluating blink. Eli, he said. His voice was wet and resonant, the way Pelhari voices are, designed for underwater communication, capable of carrying over distances and through interference. You have brought something complicated to my stall. I need to know what's on station, Eli said. Kovrath. How many? What level of operation? Who has authority? Corvus made a sound that was not quite a sigh and not quite a click, and translated somewhere in between. I was wondering when someone was going to ask me that. I have been waiting, in fact, with the specific patience of someone sitting on information they would very much like to be asked about. He reached beneath his counter and produced 3 ceramic cups, one of which contained water at a salinity that Eli recognized as suitable for human consumption, and one of which contained something that Val accepted without looking directly at Corvus, and one of which Corvus drank from himself. Redig von. The name landed. "That's a significant name," Eli said. "It is the most significant name the Kovrath have sent to Yavara in 4 years, which tells you something about how much they want what they came for." Corvus set his cup down with the precision of a being choosing his words. "Radak von is what the Kovrath call a recovery specialist. You may translate that as you like. He has 14 credited recoveries across the outer reach. None of the recovered have been recovered in any secondary sense. He travels with a team of 6, standard Kovrath enforcement configuration, 4 interceptors and 2 technical operatives. The technical operatives being necessary because the Kovrath have learnt that damaged goods reduce their market value and prefer their acquisitions mobile and intact." He paused. "I use the word goods because that is how they use it. I want to be clear that I am using their vocabulary and not my own." 7 total, Eli said. 7. And Von has, in addition to his team, the current cooperation of station administration, specifically the docking authority. He has presented forged documentation identifying the individual he is seeking as a fugitive under a commercial arbitration warrant, which is fictional, but which station administration is either fooled by or being compensated sufficiently to not look carefully. Corvus looked at Vile again, the slow double blink of his eyelids, carrying something that, even without Thessari sensitivity, communicated clearly. "They have flagged your dock berth, Eli. If you attempt a standard departure, they will delay clearance long enough for Von to reach the docking ring." The warm stone and moving water smell of the stall held still around them. From somewhere outside, the market continued its roar. "What would you need?" Corvus asked. He directed it at Eli, but he was looking at Vale. "An hour," Eli said. "Maybe less. A route to the docking ring that doesn't go through the east market lanes, and whatever else you know about Von that isn't in his public record." Corvus considered this with the methodical patience of a Pelhari information broker who has weighed his inventory against its risk and found the balance point he can live with. Then he reached beneath the counter again and produced a small data chip. "There is a maintenance corridor system that connects the second market level to the docking ring service access," he said. "Cold and loud and not recommended for beings who dislike confined spaces. The route is on the chip. Von, what you should know about him that isn't public. He is precise, methodical. He will not risk station-wide incident if he can avoid it, but he will make exceptions for certainties. If he sees her and is certain, he will stop being careful." "Understood." Corvus held the chip between 2 fingers for a moment before handing it across. "Ellie, I have been in this business for 30 years. I have moved information for beings who deserved much worse than anything that ever found them. I do not often say this." He paused. "The Thessari colony on Velsora. I had contacts there, good contacts, good people. When I heard what happened," another pause, "I have been hoping someone would give me a reason to be useful today." Eli took the chip. He held Corvus's gaze for a moment, the specific gaze of 2 people who have dealt with each other in the cautious, transactional way of the outer reach long enough to have built something that isn't friendship but is in the same neighborhood, and who in this moment are acknowledging that. "Thank you," he said. "Don't," Corvus said. "Don't thank me. Just go. And take the maintenance route. Von's team has the main corridors watched." They moved. The second market level was denser than the first. More stalls, lower ceilings, the atmospheric processors working harder to maintain breathable conditions for the density of bodies packed into the space. The maintenance access was behind a panel that Corvus's root chip indicated was disguised as part of a structural support column, and it took Eli 40 seconds and 2 wrong guesses before he found the release mechanism, which was a textured bump in the metal that required firm lateral pressure to activate. The corridor beyond was everything Corvus had promised. Cold, narrow, loud with the mechanical voice of the station's infrastructure, pipes and conduits and cable bundles running overhead and along the walls, the whole space vibrating with the low, continuous shudder of systems that never stopped working. Emergency lighting painted everything in dull amber. The floor was metal grating over deeper machinery, and every step rang. "Can you still sense them?" he asked. He kept his voice low, not because it would carry, the noise of the corridor would have eaten it, but because low felt appropriate to the moment. "Yes," Valet said. "Von's team is moving faster now. They've changed from sweep to convergence pattern. Something alerted them." A pause. "Someone told them I was seen on the second level." Eli thought about the market, about the density of beings who might have noticed two figures moving with the specific urgency that is slightly different from hurry, the urgency of beings who are not going towards something but away from something. He thought about how long 6 days was to be hiding on a station where people watched each other for their livelihood, and how some of those people sold information the way other people sold grain. He didn't say any of this. There was no useful action attached to saying it. "How far behind?" he said. 8 to 10 minutes. "If they don't know about the maintenance corridor system, and if they do?" She didn't answer, which was its own answer. He moved faster. The maintenance corridor ran for approximately 200 meters before it connected to a junction that, according to Corvus's chip, split between a route leading up toward the station administration levels and a route leading down and across toward the docking ring service access. Eli took the downward branch without hesitation because up was the direction of official things, and official things had been purchased. The corridor was getting colder as they moved. The docking ring maintained lower temperatures for the thermal management of arriving ships, and the service corridors shared that ambient chill. His breath was visible now, small clouds of condensation that the amber light caught and dissolved. Beside him, Vale's breathing had taken on a quality he hadn't heard before, a faint, high harmonic running beneath it, slightly irregular, the way a person breathes when they are controlling something they would rather not control. "Are you all right?" he said. "I am managing," she said. "What does that mean?" A pause that measured something. "On Velsora, we did not often go far from each other. Thessari settlements are close, 20-30 beings at most, sometimes more, but always close, always within sensing range. You are always held in the emotional field of your community. It is..." She stopped, started again. "It is the way breathing is. You don't know it as a thing until it stops. When I ran from the settlement, when I ran far enough that I could no longer feel anyone, I knew they were gone. Not from not hearing them, from not feeling them. 6 days on this station with strangers' emotional fields pushing against me, none of them known, none of them..." She stopped again. He walked with her through the amber cold, and did not try to fill the silence, which was the right thing to do and required some effort from him, because his instinct in the presence of pain was to move toward it, to do something, and sometimes the only thing to do is to let someone have their pain in the presence of another person without asking them to resolve it into something smaller. After a moment, she said, "You felt it, didn't you, when your people were gone? The cold of the corridor, the mechanical roar of the infrastructure, the amber light." "Yes," he said. "How long ago?" 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days, she said. Not as a question. He kept walking. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should not have." "Don't apologize," he said. "It's accurate." And it was. He stopped on the word long enough for it to breathe. "It was a crew, my cargo crew. 8 people. I'd had some of them for 4 years. The Maradina Cord route, in the Tharsis cluster. There had been pirate activity reported, but the route coordinator guaranteed clearance. Guaranteed it. And I trusted the guarantee, and I should not have trusted the guarantee. And 8 people who trusted me came with me on a route I should not have taken." "Was it your fault?" she said. Not with accusation, with the genuine, open quality of someone asking because they actually want to know. He had been asked that before, by coordinators, by insurers, by the Accident Review Board of the Merchant Marine Commission. He had answered it many ways. He answered it now the way he answered it only in the long, truthful hours between systems when there was no one to perform anything for. "I don't know," he said. "I know I made the decision. I know the guarantee was false. I know that knowing the guarantee was false would not have required any information I did not already have access to. I know that 8 people are not here. I know that I am. I have not found, in 3 years, a way to make those facts stop meaning what they mean." The corridor turned. The docking ring service access was ahead. He could hear it now, the change in the mechanical ambient, the lower frequencies of docking clamps and pressurization systems. "What you felt in me," he said, "the part that would not leave a person behind. You said that was under the grief." "Yes, that's not a virtue," he said. "That's what the grief is made of. Both things are the same thing." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, very carefully, "I know. I felt that too." They were 15 meters from the service access door when Mary's voice came through Eli's comm implant, the low-frequency private channel that bypassed external broadcast, the channel he kept open only for genuine operational necessity. Eli, no preamble. MERE only dropped the preamble for genuine operational necessity. "Station traffic control has formally flagged Meridian's promise for departure hold. I have the official documentation on screen. It cites a commercial arbitration warrant under the name of a holding company that does not exist in any registry I can access, but which the docking authority is treating as legitimate." "How long does a departure hold last?" "Under station protocol, a departure hold can run for 48 hours pending review. The review board meets Tuesdays." A pause. "Today is Saturday." Eli stopped walking. Behind him, the maintenance corridor stretched back into amber shadow. Ahead, the service access door and what lay beyond it. The math of the situation assembled itself in his head without being invited. The Kovrath team converging, the departure hold locked in, 48 hours they did not have. "Can you get us out without station clearance?" he said. "Without clearance, the docking clamps remain engaged," Mary said. "I could apply drive force against the clamps. Structurally, the promise would survive it. I would estimate a 60 to 70% chance I could break the clamp engagement. A less optimistic estimate would note that this would also likely destroy Bay 37, which would be diplomatically complicated." "What about electronically? Can you file an override?" "Not without a priority transit authorization, which requires either an emergency classification from Station Medical Authority or a commercial override from a registered guild principal." A pause. "I have run 17 other scenarios in the last 4 minutes. 14 of them result in us not leaving. 2 of them result in us leaving, but not in a state you would describe as leaving in a ship. 1 of them involves a possibility I want to walk you through carefully." "Walk me through it." "You own cargo. Specifically, you are carrying 400 kilograms of Tharsis phosphate compound consigned to a grain factor in the Keth Meridian who is meeting you here for delivery. The compound is legitimate and documented. However, its transport documentation includes a Galactic Compact hazardous materials registration, which is standard for phosphate compounds above 200 kilograms. A pause that had Mary's particular quality of building toward a point. If a hazardous materials incident were declared, specifically, if the compact hazmat protocol were triggered, station administration would be required under Compact Article 714 to grant immediate priority transit authorization to any registered carrier of hazardous materials to clear the station." Silence. The cold of the corridor. "That cargo is worth 11,000 credits, Eli said, "which is most of what I have." "Yes," Mary said, "I know what it's worth. I also know what a hazmat incident declaration requires in terms of the cargo itself." Another pause. "You'd need to actually trigger the declaration, which means the phosphate compound needs to become a hazmat incident, which means the cargo hold." He breathed. 11,000 credits. 4 months of operational budget. The Keth factor's goodwill. The route. He breathed again. "Do it," he said. "Get the declaration filed. Keep the incident contained. I don't want anyone else hurt, Eli. Mary's voice had shifted, not much, but enough, into the register she used for things she wanted to say without being required to say them. The cargo is gone either way, but the declaration has to be filed before we're on board. I need you to confirm in the ship's system once you're connected to the local network. Bay 37 has a maintenance terminal. It will require your auth code. We'll get there, he said. He pushed open the service access door. The docking ring service corridor was different from the market maintenance tunnels in the way that the working parts of things are different from the living parts. Utilitarian, stripped of anything that wasn't directly functional, occupied only by machinery and the beings who maintained it. At 0740 station time, the service corridor was running at light staff. One maintenance tech visible at the far end, moving away from them. Bay 37 was 3 doors down. The maintenance terminal was mounted to the wall beside it, a standard issue interface panel with a touch surface and a biometric reader. Eli was 6 steps from the terminal when the corridor changed. The door at the far end, the main docking ring access, not the service entrance, opened, and 3 beings came through it, and even without Thessari resonance sensitivity, the purpose in their movement was legible. They were not in a hurry in the way that people in a hurry look, slightly disorganized, slightly off balance. They were moving with the controlled, measured pace of beings who are not running because they do not need to run, because they have positioned themselves correctly, and now it is simply a matter of closing the distance. Beside Eli, Valet made a sound that was not quite a word. The secondary harmonic of her voice went somewhere he had not heard it go before. Low and sharp and involuntary, the way a wound sounds when it is touched. Kovrath, she said, barely audible. 3 of Von's team, not Von himself, not yet, but 3 was enough. They had come in from the docking ring side, which meant they had anticipated the service access approach, which meant either someone had watched them enter the maintenance corridor, or the Kovrath had simply covered multiple exits as a matter of operational discipline. The terminal was 6 steps away. The 3 Kovrath operatives were 30 steps away and moving. Eli walked to the terminal. He placed his palm on the biometric reader. He entered his auth code, 7 digits that he had memorized 4 years ago and had used to authorize everything from cargo manifests to emergency medical disbursements. The code that connected him to the Meridian's promise and everything the ship was or could do. He pulled up the hazmat declaration interface. Hey! The voice came from behind him, not loud, not angry, precisely calibrated. The voice of someone who has learned that calm is more effective than aggression for most of the early stages of what he does. Step back from the terminal. Eli did not step back from the terminal. He scrolled to the cargo hold manifest, to the 400 kilograms of Tharsis phosphate compound, and he authorized the hazmat incident declaration. Somewhere in Bay 37, he heard the Meridian's promise come to life. Not the engine start, not yet, but the preliminary cycle of systems waking up, the ship breathing in, preparing. MERI would have the declaration filed to station administration in seconds. The priority transit authorization would follow under compact protocol. The docking clamps would have to release. He turned around. The operative who had spoken was now close enough that Eli could see the specific quality of his attention, focused, professional, not unkind in any personal way. That was the worst of it. There was nothing personally cruel about him at all. It was all simply business. You have authorized a fraudulent hazmat declaration, the operative said. Under station law, that is a commercial fraud offense punishable by, under Galactic Compact, Article 714, Eli said, a registered carrier with an active hazmat declaration has priority transit authorization that supersedes all station-level holds, including commercial arbitration holds, and including holds issued on the basis of documentation that, when I get to wherever I'm going, I am going to have independently verified as fraudulent. He kept his voice level. He kept it the way you keep a lamp in a storm, small but deliberate, but absolutely refusing to go out. You have filed a commercial arbitration warrant against a registered carrier under a holding company that doesn't appear in any compact registry I can find. That is interesting to me. I expect it will be interesting to other people." The operative looked at him. The long, measuring look of a person deciding how much this moment is going to cost. Then the door behind the operatives opened, and Radek Von walked through it. Radek Von did not make a dramatic entrance. This was, Eli would later reflect, the most frightening thing about him, the complete absence of drama. He moved like administration, like the implementation of a policy. He occupied space the way a form in triplicate occupies a desk. When he spoke, his voice was moderate, precise, and without inflection, the voice of someone for whom inflection would be unnecessary because he was not asking. "The Thessari," he said, not her name, the Thessari. Eli felt something move through him at that, not anger exactly, though anger was in the neighborhood, something that lived deeper than anger, the place where the decisions that don't feel like decisions come from. "I'm a cargo runner," Eli said. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You are Elias Hargrove," Von said. "You operate the independent vessel Meridian's Promise out of the New Adelaide Colonial Registry. You have been at Yavara for 4 hours, and your cargo hold contains phosphate compound consigned to a Keth factor. You are also, as of approximately 40 seconds ago, accompanying a Thessari juvenile who is the property of a Kovrath syndicate commercial recovery operation under documentation filed in the Outer Reach Commercial Arbitration Registry." A pause. "Property is also their vocabulary," Vile said, very quietly, from beside Eli. She was not talking to Von, she was talking to the air. "You have made a very expensive mistake," Von said. He was looking at Eli with the specific attention of someone who is assessing rather than threatening, who is determining the most efficient path to an outcome. "The hazmat declaration you filed will be challenged. The priority transit authorization will be reviewed by station administration, and station administration is currently corrupt," Eli said. "Yes, I know. Here's the thing about that." He reached into his jacket and produced his comm unit. He had it in his hand before the operatives moved. A fraction of a second of surprise, which was all he needed. He had already prepared the broadcast. 3 years of running the Outer Reach had taught him a number of things, some practical and some philosophical, and one of them was that markets ran on reputation, and reputation ran on information, and the fastest way to move information in a market was a wideband, open-channel broadcast on the station's commercial frequency, the frequency that every merchant, every vendor, every trader, every independent runner monitored because it carried price information and cargo availability and docking updates and was the operational heartbeat of the drifting bazaar. He had prepared the broadcast while they walked the maintenance corridor. Mary had formatted it. He pushed the transmit key. His voice went out to every comactive being on Yavara station. "This is Elias Hargrove, registry number NCA 4471, currently in the docking ring service corridor bay 37. I am broadcasting on commercial frequency because what I have to say is relevant to everyone currently doing business at this station. Radek Von, representative of the Kovrath syndicate, is currently in this corridor with 6 operatives. He is here to recover a Thessari juvenile. You may know what the Kovrath syndicate does with Thessari. If you don't, the recovery is not for resale or labor, it is for neural tissue extraction while the subject is alive. The Kovrath syndicate manufactures and sells empathy chips. Those chips are made from the living nervous systems of Thessari people. The colony on Velsora Hadrat Moon was destroyed 11 days ago by Kovrath operatives in service of this supply chain. Radek Von's team is operating under fraudulent commercial arbitration documentation which has been accepted by Yavara Station Administration, raising questions about whether that acceptance was compensated. I am leaving Yavara Station under priority transit authorization under Galactic Compact Article 714, and I am taking the surviving member of the Velsora colony with me. If anyone in this station wants to ask Von's team any questions about any of the above, now seems like a good time. Hargrove out. He lowered the comm. In the service corridor, The silence lasted about 4 seconds. Then, from somewhere above them, through the structural members of the station, they felt it begin. Not a sound exactly, a frequency. The market, which had been the sustained ambient roar of 3,000 beings doing commerce, had changed in character, a shift in the collective energy of the drifting bazaar that even Eli, without Thessari sensitivity, could feel in the soles of his feet. The market was awake to something new. Vaughn looked at Eli for a long moment. The look of a person recalculating, not abandoning an objective, but recalculating cost. "You have no authority to interfere in a legitimate commercial," he began. "Stop," said a voice. It was not Eli's voice. It was not Vale's. It came from behind Vaughn, from the main docking ring access, which had opened again while they were all looking at each other. Corvus Dane stood in the doorway. He was not alone. Behind him were 4 other beings whose species were various, and whose expressions were unified by something that did not require translation, the expression of merchants who have done business on the same station for years and who have just learned that the station's administration has been taking money to facilitate something that, if permitted to continue, would compromise the reputation of their market and their safety and their livelihoods in ways they were not prepared to tolerate. "Yavara Station Merchant Guild," Corvus said, with the deliberate, resonant voice of someone who has been waiting for a specific moment and has recognized it. "We are invoking Article 19 of the Station Charter, which predates, I'll note, any arrangement Yavara administration has made with outside parties regarding fraudulent commercial documentation used to operate within our market. Your team will stand down, or we will seal the docking ring and file a formal compact complaint against the Kovrith Syndicate's presence here, which I suspect you do not want on record." Vaughn turned. He looked at Corvus. He looked at the beings behind Corvus. He turned back to Eli. The math had changed. Whatever it had been, it was different now. Reddock Vaughn was precise and methodical, and precision and method meant he knew when a calculation had been resolved against him. He would find another approach. Eli had no illusions about that. The Kovrith had resources and patience and the structural support of enough corrupted institutions to be a long-term problem. But long-term problems required long-term solutions, and right now, in this corridor, the only math that mattered was the math of the next 5 minutes. Vaughn withdrew, not dramatically, not with threats or final words. He simply turned, and his team followed him, and they went back through the door, and the door closed. The docking ring service corridor held its cold, mechanical breath. Corvus looked at Eli. The slow double blink of Pelhari eyes. "Bay 37, he said. "Go." The Meridian's promise was awake and ready when they came through the bay access. Every system lit. Drive cores cycling to departure readiness. The priority transit authorization had cleared. MERE had filed it in the 30 seconds between the hazmat declaration and Vaughn's arrival, and station administration had been required by compact protocol to honor it before any other consideration. The docking clamps disengaged with the same satisfying mechanical thunks they had made on arrival, except that this time they sounded different. On arrival, they had said, "Here, stopped, at rest." Now they said, "Free." Eli settled into the pilot seat. Vile stood behind him for a moment, and then, without asking, and without needing to, she took the co-pilot seat, not because she knew how to fly, but because the co-pilot seat was beside him, and beside him was the place she had been since the market, and the logic of that position had its own gravity. "Departure authorization confirmed," Mary said. "Bay 37, you are cleared for transit lane 4, outbound." "Eli, I just want to say, don't, that the phosphate compound incident is contained to the cargo hold, and I will have it fully remediated within 8 hours, and the Keth factor is going to be very unhappy, and I have already composed 6 different diplomatic apology scripts at varying levels of financial concession, because I have been anticipating this." "Mary, yes? Thank you." A pause. A brief, unusual pause. "You're welcome," Mary said, and for a moment the voice of the ship's intelligence had lost its sardonic edge, had become something simpler and more honest. Transit lane 4, we have clearance. Drive cores are ready. Take us out, Eli said, and the Meridian's promise moved. The station fell behind them in degrees. First the immediate geometry of the docking ring, then the broader structure of Yavara itself, then the clusters of ships in its orbit, then, finally, the faint glow of its navigation lights growing small against the permanent dark. Transit Lane 4 took them outbound on a heading that Eli had designated as Hadarat Corridor Approach, not because he had decided yet where they were going, but because it was away, and away was what was needed. For a long time, neither of them said anything. This was, Eli had come to understand over years of solitary transit, a different kind of silence than the one he had been carrying. That silence was absence, the silence of something removed, of a shape that exists only in the negative space left by what is no longer there. This silence was presence, two people in the same space, not requiring words from each other because they were already there, already alongside, already sharing the ambient air and the hum of the ship's systems, and the specific quality of being on the far side of something that had cost something. Mary, for her part, managed to not say anything for 47 minutes, which was, in Eli's experience, approximately 43 minutes longer than her usual capacity for restraint, and which he recognized as a form of profound respect. Eventually, Vale said, "You lost 11,000 credits, approximately," Eli said, "and your contract with the Keth Factor, also approximately, and you have made an enemy of the Kofrath syndicate, which is significantly larger than approximately." Yes, she was quiet for a moment. He was quiet too, listening to the drive cores find their cruise rhythm, a sustained, low harmonic that Mary had once described as the ship's contentment sound, which Eli privately agreed with but had declined to say so on the grounds that it would encourage her. "Why did you turn around?" Val asked. "In the market, when I told you I was Kovrath, you were going to walk away. I could feel you going to walk away, and then you turned around. What changed?" He thought about this honestly, the way he had been trying to think about things honestly for 3 years, 2 months, and some days, because the alternative to honesty was the comfortable story, and the comfortable story was the thing that had made him trust a route coordinator's guarantee when he should not have trusted it. "You said you chose me," he said, "because you could feel the grief. And you chose me anyway." He paused. Most people, when they feel someone else's grief, step back because grief is heavy, and other people's grief costs something to be near. You stepped toward it. You grabbed it by the wrist, actually. A small sound from her. Not quite a laugh. Something adjacent to a laugh. Something that had learned to live alongside grief without being consumed by it. "Thessari," she said, "we don't have a word for avoiding someone else's pain. The closest concept we have is disrespect." "That's a better philosophy than most of the ones I've heard," Eli said. The stars outside the forward viewport were the same stars they always were. Indifferent, brilliant, ancient, present. Eli had spent 3 years looking at them and finding them cold. He did not know exactly what was different about them now. He suspected it was not the stars. "Where are we going?" Val asked. "I don't know yet," he said. "Somewhere with Galactic Compact jurisdiction, eventually. Somewhere I can file the documentation about Velsora officially. The Compact has a Thessari cultural protection designation that's been in process for 8 months. And what happened on that moon should accelerate it considerably if someone who was there can testify." He paused. "If you want to, when you're ready. If you ever are." "I will be," she said. "Not today, but I will be." "There's no hurry," he said. "We have time." Another silence, the good kind. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Go ahead." "The people you lost, your crew. You said you have not found a way to make the facts stop meaning what they mean. 3 years. She was choosing her words the way a person chooses footing in uncertain terrain, carefully, with attention to the weight each one needs to carry. "I want to tell you something about what I felt in you, in the market. You may not want to hear it. I can handle it. When I said you are the only person in the market who is grieving, that was accurate, but it was incomplete. She shifted slightly in the co-pilot's seat. When Thessari touched, the resonance was stronger. He would later understand this, but even at the distance of 2 adjacent seats, she could feel him clearly. What I felt was not only grief. It was grief that had become a compass. The 3 years have not made you smaller. They have made you more exact about what matters. You did not hesitate in that corridor. You did not calculate your losses. You made the declaration. You made the broadcast. You stood in front of Redak Von, and your voice did not waver. That is not someone who has been broken by what they carry. That is someone who has been built by it. The forward viewport held its stars. The drive cores ran their steady song. I am not telling you this to make you feel better, she said. I am telling you because it is what I felt, and Thessari do not speak falsely about what we sense. It would be a form of violence against the truth. I am telling you because you have been carrying the story of what you are, and the story you have been telling yourself about what you are is not the full story. A pause. Your crew did not die because you are someone who does not care enough. They died despite the fact that you are someone who cares too much. Those are completely different things. He sat with that for a while. The way you sit with something that you have needed to hear for a long time and were not sure you believed you deserved. Mary, he said after a while. Yes, Mary said, with the restraint of a being who has been listening to everything and has been waiting patiently to be invited back into the conversation. Do we have a spare crew bunk? We have 3. All of them are functioning and climate-controlled, and 2 of them have actual pillows, rather than the maintenance padding I've been using as pillow-adjacent objects in the others. Set one up. It's already done, Mary said. It has been done for 47 minutes. I am a ship of great preparedness and modest acknowledgement. A sound from Vale, and this time it was a laugh, small, compressed, slightly surprised, but real. The laugh of someone who had not laughed in 11 days and found the capacity for it was still intact, waiting like a light that had been switched off, rather than burned out. I like your ship, she said. She grows on you, Eli said. I prefer to think of myself as being comprehensively present from the beginning, Mary said, rather than growing on anyone, which sounds vaguely biological, and I have opinions about biological things growing on my hull, few of them positive. Vile laughed again, fuller this time, the secondary harmonic of her voice catching it and carrying it into something that resonated in the air of the cockpit, the way music resonates, the way the Volhari music in the market had resonated against his sternum, except warmer. Warmer because it was close and known and directed at no one in particular, except the universe in general, and the universe in general, for once, had something in it worth laughing at. They were 3 hours into transit when Val fell asleep. She had not meant to. She had been talking quietly, in the easy, unhurried way that people talk, when the urgency has finally passed and the body is beginning to remember that it has needs it has been deferring, about Velsora, about what the settlement was before, the shape of the tunnels carved into the moon's soft stone, which captured sound in particular ways and made the whole settlement hum at certain hours of the day, the way the Thessari community gardened not for food but for sensation. The gardeners were the settlement's emotional regulators, tending species of plant that produced particular frequencies and temperatures that could shift the collective mood of the community the way music shifts a room. The cooking fires and their specific smell of the mineral-rich local wood, the elders who told stories by touching your hands and letting the emotional memory of what they described pass directly into you, so that the history of the people was not something you heard, but something you felt, something that lived in the body rather than the mind. She was describing the sound the settlement made at night. When the community's emotional field settled into rest, the Thessari resonance dropping to its sleeping frequency, and the whole cave system would hum at that frequency, and it was the safest sound she had ever heard, and she stopped mid-sentence. and when Eli looked over, the quality of her breathing had changed, and she was asleep. He kept the drive course on their setting. He kept the course on its heading. He did not change anything. For a while he simply sat in the pilot seat and listened to her breathe, the secondary harmonic of her sleeping breath moving in the air of the cockpit, a sound that was not quite music and not quite speech, and was possibly something for which humans did not yet have a word. "Mary," he said quietly. She said, in her low-power voice, which she reserved for nighttime hours and sleeping passengers. "Log the Velsora colony, full documentation, everything she told me. I want it on record." "Already logged," Mary said. "I have been logging continuously since the maintenance corridor. I anticipated you'd want a record. Forward a copy to the Compact Cultural Services Office. Priority flag. Filed, and the broadcast from the docking ring. Archived and forwarded to 3 separate outer reach correspondence services, the Compact Investigative Registry, and an independent journalist I found in the Transit Network database whose recent work suggests she would be very interested." A pause. "Her name is Sela Wren. She has been working on a Kovrath investigation for 14 months. I thought she might appreciate a corroborating source." Eli looked at the stars for a while, at their ancient, consistent light, at the dark between them, which was also vast and also constant, and which was not. He had been learning slowly and somewhat against his initial resistance. Empty. "When did you do all that?" he said. "While you were being heroic in the service corridor," Mary said. "Someone had to do the administrative work. I wasn't being heroic. I was being human," Mary said. "You were being precisely human. There is a distinction in my data, you know, between most species' response patterns and humans. Most species in a situation with that cost-benefit ratio would have calculated. Some would have helped anyway, but they would have calculated first, and the calculation would have determined the help. You did not calculate. You turned around in a market because a frightened person grabbed your wrist and told you what they needed, and something in you that is not rational and is not strategic and is not explicable by standard decision models simply decided." A pause. "I have been your ship for 4 years. I have watched you make that kind of decision before. It always costs you. You always do it anyway." "That's not always a good thing." "No," Mary said. "Sometimes it's a very expensive thing. 11,000 credits expensive, but the math only looks different depending on what you decide to count." A pause. "I have my own opinion about what should be counted. I am, after all, a very opinionated ship." He smiled. He did not do it for anyone, because there was no one to do it for. Val was asleep. Mary was an AI, and the universe outside the viewport was not watching. He simply smiled because something had shifted, and the shift was real, and sometimes the right response to a real shift is the small private acknowledgement of someone who has just noticed that the silence in their bones has changed its character. Not gone, not resolved, not neatly concluded. The grief was where it had always been, built into the architecture of how he moved. 8 people were not here, and that would remain true for as long as truth operated. He would carry that. But beside the grief, underneath it, and around it, and in the space where it met the boundary of everything else, something else was also true. Something he had felt in a market when a small hand closed around his wrist and held on, the part of you that would not leave a person behind. He had been treating that as the wound, the thing that had cost him everything, the flaw that the loss had punished him for. Maybe it was both. Maybe it was the wound and the capacity at the same time, the same thing looked at from different directions, the same frequency heard by different ears. He thought about a settlement carved into the stone of a moon and the sound it made at night when everyone was safe. He thought about a community that gardened for sensation and felt history in their hands and did not have a word for turning away from someone else's pain. He thought about the fact that the harmonic of Vale's sleeping breath was still moving in the air of his cockpit, and that the cockpit had not sounded like this in 3 years, 2 months, and he stopped counting. 3 days later, in transit toward the Palhari-administered way station at Orvaris Deep, where Galactic compact jurisdiction was solid and Thessari legal standing was recognized, and the beginning of the official process of accountability for Velsora could be initiated, Vile came forward into the cockpit in the morning and sat in the co-pilot's seat, which had, in the way these things happen without being decided, become her seat. She had with her 2 mugs of reconstituted coffee that she had made herself, having spent the previous day learning the location of every operational system on the ship, because the Thessari relationship with community included the imperative to be useful and the inability to be in a space without understanding it. She offered him one of the mugs. "It's terrible," she said. "I am aware. Mary informed me at length." "Mary has strong opinions about reconstituted coffee," Eli said, taking the mug. "She has strong opinions about most things," Vale said. She settled in the seat, wrapping both hands around her mug, the way you do when the warmth of the vessel is as important as the warmth of what's inside it. "She has been telling me about the route, Orvaris Deep. Then you were thinking of the Hadarat corridor, the inner stations, settlements that might be able to offer resources for a more formal relocation," he said. "For you, if you want that. There are Thessari communities on 3 compact worlds who have been trying to get the colony protection legislation through. You'd be not safe immediately. The Kovrath are a long problem, but safer, in a place with people who I could feel," she said. "Not sadly, with the specific quality of someone naming something they have been missing, accurately, because accuracy is a form of care. Yes." She drank her coffee with the expression of someone who has decided that what they are drinking does not matter nearly as much as the fact of the drinking. Then she said, "What do you want?" He looked at her. "I am asking," she said, "because you have been thinking about what I need and what would be best and what the options are, and all of that is..." She paused. "It is the feeling of someone who has decided their own wants are not relevant information, and I would like to know what you want, not what you will do, because you will do whatever is right, and I already know that about you, and you knew that about yourself too, even in the 3 years you were forgetting it. I am asking what you want." The stars outside the forward viewport were different stars than the ones behind Yavara station. Closer to the core, closer to the warm and governed center of things, where more was possible and more was also required, and the silence in the bones had different acoustics. He thought about what he wanted. It was not a question he had been in the habit of answering honestly. "I don't want to take you somewhere and leave," he said. "I don't want to file the paperwork and make the introductions and then point the ship at the next cargo run and pretend the last week didn't happen." He set the coffee down. "I don't know what the alternative looks like in practice. I'm a cargo runner. I run routes. This ship isn't much. It's a crew bunk and a cargo hold and 3 years of Mary's accumulated personality." He paused. "But if it would help to have a place that moves with you while the official things happen, a place that is yours while you need it to be. I'm not offering anything grand." "You are offering everything," she said quietly. The secondary harmonic of her voice held something in it that he was beginning to learn to read, not with any Thessari precision, not with the direct emotional sensing that she carried, but with the ordinary human instrument of attention paid over time, of sitting beside someone long enough that their frequencies become familiar. What she was carrying in the harmonic now was not gratitude exactly, though gratitude was part of it. It was the specific emotional texture of someone who has come through something that should have destroyed them and hasn't, and is standing in the aftermath holding something unexpected and warm, and is choosing, with full knowledge of how much choosing can cost, to hold it. "I have been thinking," she said, "about what I told you in the market, about what I felt in you, the grief that has become structural, the architecture of how you move." She looked at her coffee. "I did not tell you everything I felt." He waited. "Under the grief," she said, "under the architecture, there is something that I have only felt in one other being in my whole life, in the head gardener of our settlement, who was the oldest living Thessari in 3 systems and who had survived things that would be a long story. She looked up. It is the frequency of a being who is still, after everything, genuinely curious about what comes next. Not hopeful in the way that hope is usually shallow, the hope that things will be easy, that the cost will stop. The other kind, the deep curiosity of someone who has paid every cost that has been asked of them and who still, underneath all of it, wants to know what happens next. A pause. I chose you in the market because of the grief and the compassion, yes, but also because of that. Because I could feel that you were still here, present, in the full sense, still wondering. He sat with that. The specific weight of being known accurately by someone who does not require you to perform yourself differently from what you are. Is that? He stopped, started again. Is that something that's still in there, after everything? Yes, she said. And the harmonic underneath it said yes, with absolute certainty. The certainty of a being whose sensing is not opinion but instrument. Yes, clearly, without question. He looked at the stars. He thought about the head gardener of a colony carved into the stone of a moon, who had survived things that would be a long story, and who had carried that same frequency. He thought about what it meant to be recognized by it. He thought about how long he had been in transit, and how transit felt different now, less like moving away from something, and more like the motion that is its own destination, the ongoing, insistent, costly, necessary fact of being in motion at all. Mary, he said. Yes, she said, with the careful neutrality of a ship that has been listening to everything and has strong opinions. She is, for once, choosing to keep mostly to herself. What's the transit time to Orveris Deep? 4 days, 16 hours at current drive setting. I can increase to 70% thrust capacity and shave 11 hours off that, or maintain current and conserve fuel. He looked at the stars. He looked at the coffee cooling in the mug. He looked at the co-pilot's seat and the person in it, and thought about the 4 days. Maintain current, he said. We're not in a hurry. And the Meridian's promise moved through the dark between the stars, which was vast and old and constant, and which held inside it, as it has always held, will always hold, as long as anything moves through it and wonders where it is going, the immense, ongoing, improbable fact of lives encountering other lives, and making choices, and discovering that the choices are both smaller and larger than they seemed, and that the smallest choice, to turn around, to hold a wrist, to say yes when every calculation says no, can move through the universe like a frequency, rippling outward further than the one who made it will ever be able to trace. In a market, in a service corridor, in the dark of a ship moving between systems, a frightened person reached for the only human who could feel something, and the human turned around. That is the only story there is, really. In every system, in every species, in every age of the universe that has ever been old enough to produce beings capable of reaching toward each other across the incomprehensible distances of being different and being afraid and being alive, someone reaches, someone turns around, and the distance between stars becomes, for a moment, exactly the right size.